What's your name? How'd you get here?
The neighbor saw the condition RF was in, immediately called for the police. And when they got to Jodi's home, she answered the door and seemed shocked to see a contingent of officers.
Open the door! Jodi, I need you to step out.
I have my attorney.
That's great. Step out of the house.
No, I'm not going to step out of the
Step
house.
out of the house.
Step out of the house.
Whoa.
We're just going to see if
Whoa,
anybody
whoa,
else.
whoa.
Is there anybody else home?
Wait a minute, how do you come to my house?
Right there.
Inside the house, officers found EF, Ruby's youngest child, in what appears to be a closet, possibly mistaking her for a boy due to her condition.
You come in, my buddy. I'm a police officer. Are you going for the union here? Hey, you okay? Is this just you in here? I'm Sergeant Tobler. What's your name? I just have one.
Officers arrest both Ruby and Jodi, taking them down to the police station. Now, during all of this, Kevin Frankie, Ruby's husband, is nowhere to be seen. But he later shows up on the day of the arrest at the police department in Ivins. And this is what we're going to get into, what he says to police. So police record their first interaction with him on video.
Just let you know, I am going to review the Miranda rights before we start. We're just going to kind of ask you a few questions about your involvement. Okay? So, first, you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be held against you in the court of law. Okay? You have the right to an attorney or to have him or her present while questioning. If you cannot afford to hire one, one will be hired to represent you. If you decide to answer questions, you can stop at any time. Okay? Do you understand your rights?
I do.
Okay. Do you wish to speak to me now?
Well, I want to pick up my kids.
How about this? We're going to ask you some questions, and if you don't want to answer them, you just say, hey, man, I'm not going to answer that.
Sure.
And we
Just say, hey, I'm not going to talk. That's not beneficial to you, and then we're done. You're nowhere, and we're nowhere. And
Sure.
you understand that, right?
Yes.
Okay.
What's a good address for you?
I'm not comfortable giving my address right now.
Okay. But you do live in Springville?
I do.
What Kevin tells the officers about his relationship with his family over the last year seems to shock them.
So are they all living with you, or
No, I haven't seen them for over a year.
any of them?
No, none of them.
For a year?
Over a year.
Okay.
I've been in a separation
From who?
from my wife and family.
What's your wife's name?
Ruby.
Ruby. When's the last time you saw Ruby?
The last time I saw her
Yeah.
was the 18th of this month. We met she requested me to sign over vehicles, or the titles to the vehicles, the vehicle that she drives, that were all in my name.
When's the last time you physically saw?
The day that I moved out, July 24th, 2022.
24th of 2022.
Or July 25th, July 25th.
So it's my understanding that at least home here in Kayenta and Ivins, have you been to that home?
No,
You've not been to that home?
no, I don't know. I don't know what's anything that's been going on.
Like, this is good, man. Like, I would love to be able to help you out with this, and like, I'm seeing the light of being in that home because I'm unaware of your involvement in what's really going on. So for you to say that you're unaware of the status of your kids kind of makes, I know that sounds kind of crummy to you, but it sounds kind of good to me. Like, who lives in that home with your, is it ex-wife? Is it currently a separated wife? Like, who lives in that home with your children?
To be honest, I don't know. I know that she's there with 4 of the children, and our 2 older children have moved out.
Now, we kind of knew about this when we interviewed Kevin's attorney, Randy Kester, back in the day, because I asked him straight up, like a lot of people were asking, where was Kevin? How did he not know about any of this? And as Randy Kester said, as Kevin just said, Kevin stayed away because he thought it was best for his family. Now, the investigators in this interview want to know how Kevin knew what was going on with the kids that day.
I received a message that I needed to come pick up my kids from the police department in Highlands.
And who was that message from?
Well, I prefer not to say right now.
It would just help us a lot.
I'll try to figure out who reached out to you, because it makes sense that that would happen. I'm just not aware of anyone who did that from our department.
Right. And I'm not comfortable saying right now who reached out to me.
Okay.
So again, we learned during our interview on Sidebar with Kevin's attorney, Randy Kester, that it was actually Ruby who called her husband to say there was an emergency and to come get the kids. Kevin continued to insist that up until that point, he had no reason to suspect that anything was amiss.
And then when all the kids left, Ruby took all of them?
Yeah, she stayed in the house and I moved out.
Okay. And did you ever try to reach out to the kids, drop by the home, or
No.
was
I
there?
honored the no separation boundary that we agreed to.
So what
Or
was
no
your separation?
contact boundary, excuse me.
Did you have a no contact order in place?
Order? No, this was between my wife and I.
So what did Ruby ask of you when you separated?
What did she ask of me?
Did she ask you not to contact the kids?
Ruby invited me to leave the home while I thought about the choices that I've made in my life and the way that I've treated her.
Okay.
And so I left.
And how long had you and Ruby been married before?
We were married in 2000.
So about 22 years?
When we separated, we were going on 22 years. Yes.
Okay. And during your marriage, how was disciplining your kids? How would you discipline your kids?
Yeah, I'm not going to answer that question.
Okay, that's fine.
Have you been since separated, or since they lived here in the city of Ivins? Have you communicated with your wife regarding like disciplining with your kids, or their care, or their physical well-being?
No.
So is she doing this on her own and just telling you how your kids are?
She's not telling me anything about the kids.
I want you to keep that in mind, what he is saying, the idea of I was doing things that were wrong and I needed to stay away. But investigators want to know more about Jodi Hilderbrand and her connection to the Frankie family.
Who's this female Jodi that your wife lives with? Do you know a female named Jodi?
She is a therapist and a life coach, I know. And she's...
Do you respect her?
Do I respect her? Yeah, I think she's a very honest, truthful person, yes.
Okay. You place value on Jodi?
I don't know what that means.
Like, do you value what she says and how she treats? Is your wife a client of hers? Is your wife a partner of hers? Is your wife a roommate with her? Your kids are living in her house is what I'm trying to say.
I'm not aware of that, but I know that they've been in business for the last year filming.
Who's they?
Ruby and Jodi. They
Ruby
film
and Jodi have been in business.
podcasts, and so every week a podcast goes up and I listen to it. And
What's the name of it?
Connections with an X.
Like CON.
CONNEXIONS. Yeah.
And then, like, do you support them in that role and doing that and having?
Do I support them in the business?
Yeah, like, do you support them and think that what they're doing is a good thing, or
I support their business efforts. I think it's a good thing.
are you involved with their business efforts, or
No.
are you aware of the physical condition of your children?
No. No. I've chosen to trust my wife with the children. That was part of the agreement of our separation.
Is that you allow her to physically provide for the needs of the child, you were just removed from that? I mean, you pay support. I know this is personal questions, but
No, yes, my job is to financially provide for
I'm
them.
just trying to figure out like how much of a role do you play in the caretaking of specifically, is it of those two kids?
I pay the bills.
Okay.
With my job, I provide the money, goes into a shared bank account.
Kevin tells the officers that he agreed to leave the home to work on his own problems, including an apparent addiction to pornography. In this interview, he appears to say it was Ruby, not Jodi, who asked for the separation.
Jodi and Ruby have a close relationship, and Jodi saw the need for me to get help, and frankly, I agree. The space has been exactly what I need to face, my own addictions and receive the support and help that I've needed. And so this space has been very, very good for me.
Mm-hmm.
So when you stated that you and Ruby had this no contact that you guys just verbally agreed upon, was that an idea given by Jodi that she recommended you guys have that space and not contact one another?
I'm not aware of that. The invitation for me to leave and take space was from my wife.
And then finally, more than 20 minutes into this interview, the police reveal to Kevin some of the details of what's going on.
Well, you're the custodial parent of these children. I don't see why we can't explain to you why we're involved. So I don't recall the exact time, but sometime before 11 o'clock today, we received a phone call from 911 on our dispatch that a 12 to 13-year-old boy was knocking on doors in a neighborhood asking for food and water, that he was severely emaciated, that he had
What does emaciated mean?
skinny, scrawny, malnutritioned, not enough food, not enough water to sustain life. So
I'm sorry, what?
he had duct tape on his extremities, on his hands, on his ankles, and those were covering rope burns that were used to tie him down. Take a second and think about what I just said. That's the condition of your son. Given that information, your son was taken to the hospital. A warrant has been applied and granted by the Department of Child and Family Services to remove both from your wife's care. So no one right now is going to have access to these two children based on their physical condition. Do you understand that?
I understand.
Would you condone that behavior?
Would I condone that behavior?
That's my job. My job is to find out your knowledge of the treatment of these
Based on your
precious
description,
children.
no. Again, I don't know the details, or I don't know what's going on, but as you described that sounds
horrible, disgusting. No human being should be treated like that.
Okay.
That's my thoughts, but again, we might be different on that.
We'll get you a card when you can get with Adam and schedule that, okay?
How do I schedule that if you guys are on the phone?
We'll give you a card with the phone number.
You can go out the front door to my vehicle out there. Hop on in. I'll help you if you need.
I had a crash on the right side, my shoulder's screwed up.
Okay. Alright, step up, please. Thank you. Go and face that officer. Put your hands on top of your head, please. Interlace your fingers. Thank you. Put on top of your head. Look to your left. Thank you. I just don't want to hit you in the head on accident with the cup. Okay. Go down. Trace, you want to let you know what criminal charge is for, so you're under arrest. It's going to be 2 counts, second-degree felony of child abuse or neglect, okay? Do you understand that or no? Are you okay? I'm wondering if there's like a medical clearance that needs to, like, do you need medical attention before you go to the jail? Okay.
For the malnourishment, you guys are in direct custody of those kids. Okay, do you have any questions for me at this time? No questions? Okay, you can hop in.
Now, we also received a lot of photos from Utah authorities in this document dump. Many of them show the inside and outside of Jodi Hilderbrand's home in Ivins. The house itself is huge with staircases, corridors, doors, every direction the police looked at as they searched the home. We never really got a good grasp of what this house was like until now. Some of the photographs show evidence that investigators were compiling against the women, including pictures of the duct tape, rope, gauze, the cayenne pepper and honey solution that they used to treat wounds. Other pictures showed pantries full of food that the children were clearly not allowed to eat. And still, there were these other photos that showed the actual wounds to both RF and EF. And I will tell you, they are just too graphic to show. It's too much. And as we've mentioned, RF still had duct tape on his ankles and wrists when he was taken to the hospital with what appeared to be infected wounds underneath. And I'll say this, these wounds, seeing them, worse than I could have imagined. Now, Ruby Frankie's journal entries, that's what we're going to get into next. This was one of the largest documents released in this massive information dump. It is a 60-page journal, apparently written by Ruby Frankie. Not only does it give a timeline of events, but it records the brutal treatment of these 2 children. Some parts of the journal have been completely blacked out by officials. They've been redacted, but what remains, it really leaves nothing to the imagination. At the beginning of the journal, on a page titled Timeline, the journal says that Jodi received a blessing from the temple president on May 21st, 2023. Then Ruby, along with her 4 minor-age children, went down to Jodi's house to do, quote, spring cleaning. The first mention of punishments for RF are on June 30th, 2023, when the journal states, quote, he refuses to do wall sits and says he's done. The next day, it's noted that RF has to sleep outside. On July 14th, we have our first mention of EF. It states E refuses to work, screams, has hair shaved off. It also states that the next day, RF ran away in the middle of the night and Ruby found him a couple hours later. So clearly not his first escape attempt. So then there are several redacted pages, and then the journal seems to jump back in time to a little bit to July 9th and July 10th. On the 10th, the journal states, quote, it's R's birthday, and he doesn't even know what month it is. E and R have been in so much deviant behavior, they won't control their bodily functions. They are both furious. Their selfish, sinful lifestyle is being intervened upon. I told R he emulates a snake. He slithers and sneaks around looking for opportunities when no one is watching, and then he scurries. If he wants to emulate the Savior, he needs to be 100% obedient with exactness, no wavering, no hiding. No wonder that the prosecutors said that this was also a form of emotional abuse as well. Really putting the blame on these young children. What do you think they're thinking? Then a few pages later, Ruby writes, quote, E is better behaved with Jodi. She likes to think she can still manipulate me. I gave her a pixie haircut. All her long hair is gone. No more distracting with hair. R told me he would rather have a glass of water than me as his mother. And we know that both children were being denied food and water. Ruby even writes that RF was caught stealing water from the garden hose. Stealing? Ruby also writes, quote, E told me she figures they had been here 8 weeks. I asked E if she felt like she had made progress over the 8 weeks. Yes. I told her she was delusional. She made no progress. She continues to lie and manipulate. Last night, her screaming and headbanging were evidence of no change. By the way, we're talking about a 9, 10-year-old at this time. On July 14th, Ruby writes, quote, E woke up. I reminded her that if she whined, cried, or squinted her eyes at me or soured her face, I would be buzzing her hair. If she was going to act sick, she can look sick. She agreed with a smile. I told her because she didn't listen the night before, She would do 2 sets of boxes and stairs with a 5-minute break. She did the first set easily and agreeably. After 5 minutes of rest, she began whimpering. When she got to the bottom of the stairs, she slipped and dropped the box. I put her in the dog wash and shaved her head, then back to the boxes. This is disgusting. And we also know that Ruby and Jodi forced the children to stand outside in the hot sun in the Utah summer where it can get up to 120 degrees. In a journal entry, Ruby writes, quote, "When E was outside today and it was hot, she acted like she was dying. So pitiful. I told her the heat in hell is much hotter than God is going to burn the wicked, so either get used to it or start changing." The journal also describes what happened when RF ran away in July. He had been made to sleep outside on the patio near Ruby's bedroom. She woke up in the middle of the night and he was gone. She and Jodi both went out in the cars to look for him, and she writes, quote, "Then I see R walking on the left side of the road. I call Jodi to let her know. I turn the car around and stop. I get out of the car. R is shocked to see me. Get in the car. Are you shocked to see me?" R nods his head and gets in. Me and R in the front. 2:45, I woke up. 3, we leave in cars. 3:14 a.m., I called Jodi with R. The sun started lighting the roads just an hour and a half later. The devil wants me in prison. My children dead. I meet Jodi back home. Ruby continually talks about her children being evil, possessed by demons, and unwilling to repent. She writes about locking them in closets, poking them with a cactus, making them do physical exercise for hours. She also writes that Jodi has been actively looking for land to buy in Arizona where they could really dig into fixing the kids. Can you imagine if that happened? Would these kids even be alive? But this also, I will tell you from a legal point of view, fills in a lot of those details that we read about in their respective plea agreement documents, the specific details of abuse. And I imagine these entries are what proved what happened to these kids. And it shows how tough it would have been for them to defend themselves at a criminal trial when you have these kind of journal entries. As if the physical injuries and the accounts of the kids weren't enough. Just read this stuff. But now we move on to another piece of this document release. And that is when we have to talk about the jailhouse phone calls. These calls are almost always recorded, and inmates and defendants, people on the other side of the line, they know this, and yet they say things. But we knew about these calls. Remember? Remember when Eric Clark, the Washington County attorney during Jodi's sentencing, alluded to these recorded calls as evidence that Hildebrandt never has showed remorse for what she did? So in these calls, which are labeled October 17th and October 18th, 2023, you hear Jodi seemingly defending her actions, and there seems to be a religious justification or rationale.
It feels like I was being set up to end up here. I know that sounds bizarro. I mean, I shouldn't be here. I haven't done anything wrong. And I don't know if I'm going to be like some kind of example, but when I get out of here, I have a story to tell, and I'm going to try to do everything I can to protect the children, because that's what's happening, is that kids are being just horribly abused. Nightmare here, Dennis. Nobody wants the truth. Nobody wants the truth. Nobody wants the truth, because these kids, I told Doug, I woke up, the spirit told me, it's all the devil. I mean, you've seen him. I mean, I've known you, for 5 years? You've watched him come at me, come at me, come at me, come at me. And you're exactly right, because he knows I know what he's doing. And he uses these kids. And he uses all of us as the adults, the parents that don't hold the kids accountable. So now it's abusive to make a kid sleep on the floor. It's abusive. Or it's abusive to, that's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. You can't even raise your kids anymore. He doesn't seem really animated. He seems like, the pictures are going to destroy you. And I'm like, we didn't do that. We didn't do that. Those pictures we did not do. He did that to himself, yes. Did we put that on him and then he rubbed around and cut himself? Yes. But we didn't do that.
Wow. Now, I want you to keep in mind that the idea of the devil and the evil spirit, keep that in mind. But the idea that either she is not taking responsibility for the injuries of the children or that it's not really abuse, this is why it wouldn't be so surprising if the Board of Pardons and Paroles may not be so quick to release Jodi. But the jailhouse phone calls weren't just from Jodi Hilderbrand. No. We also heard from Ruby Franke. And there is a bit of a progression here because listen to what she says when she's first arrested. Specifically, it seems about the kid's injuries. And this appears to be calls that she had with Kevin, Frankie, her husband, the day after she was arrested. They're labeled August 31st, 2023.
This is a witch hunt. The devil's been after me for years.
They're going to be in the hospital for 3 days.
So weird. It's just not necessary. Like trying to exaggerate this.
So they didn't show me any pictures or anything, but the way they described it, it was very serious.
So the way that I hear that is she is basically saying the kid's injuries are overblown, which, by the way, if you recall during her sentencing, didn't she say something to the effect of the minute the officers put the cuffs on her, she had been set free, she knew that she did wrong, something to that effect? That doesn't seem to be consistent because it seems like she was still defensive and justifying what she did in the immediate aftermath of her arrest. And by the way, remember, as I said before, when she's arrested by law enforcement, she's not that cooperative. She's not even talking to them. By the way, that reference to a witch hunt and that the devil had been out for her for years could possibly be referring to the fact that the Frankies had faced controversy for some time over their videos, the allegations of child abuse. But again, in the first few days of this arrest, you hear Ruby defending not only herself, but Jodi. And the man on the call with her, Kevin Frankie, or it seems to be Kevin Frankie, seems to be supporting her. There have been so many developments, and I want to talk specifically about one person we haven't focused on enough, Pam Hatcher. For that, I want to bring in one of our favorites. Always makes me smile. No, everybody loves him here. KUTV2 News' reporter, anchor, Brian Schnee. Brian, good to see you. You're rocking an amazing jacket from the station. They don't even give me anything here from Law&Crime. I need a rain jacket. What am I doing wrong? But good to see you. First time we've spoken since the evidence has dropped. Let me just get your initial reaction to that.
Jesse, always great to talk to you, and we'll get you one of these jackets too, especially if we keep doing this. But,
yeah.
You know, I had the opportunity to comb through a lot of that evidence as you probably have and the folks at Law&Crime, and there's just so much in there. And there's so many avenues to this case that are beyond the surface level. And that is where so much of the coverage has been, is really at the surface, because we didn't have access to these videos, these pictures, which are horrific, and then the documents. And I think the journal is, of course, the most telling about the admission of guilt, the admission of abuse in writing. Detectives had this early on after they served the second search warrant. That is where they were able to gather the journal and other critical things. And that ultimately was the tall tale of, hey, we've got enough here to get these two women charged on second-degree felony child abuse charges here in the state of Utah, because it was all written down. And as damning as the body camera video is, and the photos, and the jail calls, the journal is where Ruby writes everything she did to these children over that 6-month span. So the officers had plenty to work with and ultimately share with the prosecution to move forward.
Not surprised they pled guilty after all this evidence. It would have been very, very tough to defend. All right, so the reason I wanted to talk to you specifically today was about someone we haven't talked a lot about, Pam Hatcher. Now, first I want to say that she has never been accused of any crime connected to this case. She's never been charged. Her closeness, I should say, with both Ruby and Jodi has made people somewhat suspicious of her. Now, Hatcher was involved in the connections business with Ruby and Jodi. There's this life coaching therapy business. Hatcher listed on the website as president of Connections, while Ruby was listed as a mental fitness trainer. And on the day that Jodi and Ruby were arrested in Ivins, Utah, August 30th, 2023, the middle children were with Pam Hatcher and her husband more than 4 hours away in American Fork, Utah. We are going to get to that in a second. But before we even get to that, I want to actually start with when Pam's name was mentioned in these newly released materials. Now, you mentioned something to me about the journal entries. What did we learn from Ruby's journal entries with respect to Pam Hatcher?
Well, Pam Hatcher's not in there a lot, Jesse, but she is mentioned by name in the journal, specifically on July 15th, 2023. Before she mentions Pam's name, Ruby mentions going to bed after midnight with E sleeping on the floor next to the bed and R on the patio outside of the sliding window, sleeping outside, Jesse. First step, right? You read just one line of this journal and you're like, whoa, there's part of the abuse, mental or physical. The next line mentions Pam on that date. And it does say what we already knew about Pam. Pam was taking care of the two daughters, in essence of being kind of a liaison between mom and the two daughters as they lived out of that Springville home with mom not around a whole lot. And the mention there is Ruby wondering if Pam was able to take one of her children to take her ACT test. And it was on that day that they first mentioned Pam Hatcher. Now, I believe Pam was also one of the people that called Ruby in jail. And the reason why I believe that, because it's not written out in those jail calls, at least from where I found, and there's so much evidence, I could have missed it. But when I was speaking with one of the detectives earlier this week, she mentioned screening a call between Pam and Ruby in jail. So there is a connection there. Remember back when we got that American Fork body camera video from Pam's home? And Pam, in a way, said, I'm not that close to Ruby, but her children were there. We did know from talking to Jodi Hilderbrand a long time ago. They told me Pam was always around Jodi's home. That was back when Jesse was living with Jodi, tried to leave, endured her own abuse, shared that abuse with us, myself at KUTV2 News and also Law&Crime, and really had that story told. So Pam is involved, but Pam was never charged.
The abuse that Ruby Frankie's two youngest children endured started to come to light in August of 2023 when Ruby's youngest son, identified as RF, managed to escape from Jodi's home in Ivins, Utah, and run to a neighbor asking for him to call the police.
Yes. Hi, I was just wondering if you could do two favors.
Well, what are they?
Taking me to the nearest police station. Well, actually, just one's fine.
What's going on, son? Have a seat there.
It's personal business.
Have a seat. What's your name? How'd you get here?
New video files released by Utah officials shows us what RF looked like when he got to that home. Emaciated with duct tape on his wrists and ankles. It is a horrifying sight. And then EF, his younger sister, 9 years old, was found in a similar condition inside of a closet-like room in the house. That launched a huge investigation into Ruby Franke and Jodi Hilderbrand. They were ultimately arrested, charged, pled guilty, and sentenced to consecutive terms of aggravated child abuse. For that, I want to bring in Ben Chu, famed defense attorney who represented Johnny Depp during his massive defamation trial. He's a friend of the network, friend of the show, friend of mine. I feel good saying it. Ben Chu, good to see you. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me, Jesse. Great to see you again.
Great to see you. Let me just start off. We just watched that video of Ruby Frankie's youngest son asking for help. And thank goodness he did, because the big question is, if he didn't, would he or his sister even be alive? What was your reaction to seeing that?
Well, Jesse, I am the father of two boys, one who just celebrated his 12th birthday, and I became emotional watching that. Children that age are really vulnerable, as you know, and it was just pathetic and heart-wrenching to see.
Yeah. And, you know, we know what first responders encountered when they raced to that home. Let's take a look.
How did you get the ropes on you? Who did them? You're not in trouble with me, okay? We're just trying to figure out what's going on. Our main focus right now is you, okay? Who put the ropes on you? Supposed to help you what?
Now, obviously, it was bleeped out. This is a minor child. But having said that, when I look at this kind of evidence, Ben, it's not surprising they pled guilty. I don't know how they would have mounted a defense when you have this kind of evidence, these kinds of victims explaining what happened.
I agree with you, Jesse. There's no defense of that. If you look at him, he's so emaciated, he's wasted away to nothing. and how anybody could torture a little boy like that or a little girl, because the girl was also treated horrifically. It's beyond comprehension.
Let's move on. I want to get your reaction to this next part, which I thought was fascinating. When officers knocked on the door, the home of Jodi Hilderbrand, she answered, apparently already on the phone with her attorney.
Police officers, open up!
Got movement right here.
Right there.
Contact. Got movement. Open the door! Jodi, I need you to step out.
I have my attorney.
That's great. Step out of the house.
No, I'm not going to step out of the
Step
house.
out of the house.
Step out of the house.
Whoa.
We're just gonna see if
Whoa,
anybody
whoa,
else.
whoa.
Is there anybody else home?
Wait a minute, how do you come to my house?
Right there.
Look, they come on into my house.
Just have a seat right there.
Do you have a search warrant?
Have a seat right there.
Do you have a search warrant?
Have a seat right there. I'll explain everything after. Have a seat right there.
Do you have a search warrant, sir?
Control 12X11. Can you hold the air? We're searching the house.
I can tell you what's in the house.
Okay. Just have a seat right there for me.
Do you have a search warrant?
We'll explain it after this.
You can't just come into my house without a search warrant.
We'll explain everything after this, ma'am.
We will get more to that in a little bit, but your initial reaction to seeing her being taken out of that house so that they ultimately do find that 9-year-old girl in there.
Again, extraordinary. And as you noted, she had the presence of mind or consciousness of guilt to know to call her attorney, and but to have the temerity to call the police, to call their conduct into question when she had a tortured girl inside her house is nothing short of extraordinary.
She may not think she did anything wrong, which we'll get into in a little bit, but let's focus on Ruby Franke. We will get to Jodi Hilderbrand in a minute. So this is the mother of those 2 children, found to be basically starving. And from the time the police detained her at Jodi's home, she didn't say a word to officers. She was very silent. She was held in a small living room or living area with an officer monitoring her. And after more than an hour, a female investigator comes in to pat her down and put her in handcuffs. Let's take a look.
All right, well, it feels good in here. So, hey, Ruby, at this time, I know you said that you're already detained, but I'm going to be taking you back to the police department. Okay, so I'm going to hop up. If I can fit through here.
You want to put it in one of our vehicles?
Yeah, you want to. Okay, just place your hand behind your back for me. Perfect. And then, right now, I can put a finger in each of these, okay? And I'm just going to double up those so they don't tighten up on you on the way out there. Where's your car?
It's out there.
Yeah.
About by the command.
You don't have anything on you that I should know about, correct? Any weapons, anything that we're going to find. Before you put you in a police vehicle, we need to search your person to make sure you don't have anything on you. Is there anything you have on you? Okay, I'm going to search you before we put you in his car. That's just protocol, so I'm just going to have you step right over here and then just widen your legs, widen your stance. Yep, perfect. Are you wearing a bra? Okay, I'm just going to go like this through and make sure you don't have anything.
So then later on, Ruby revealed in a jail phone call that she deliberately didn't say anything to the officer. Seemed like that was the advice of her counsel or something that she thought from the advice of her counsel. And once they're at the station, the officer monitoring Ruby tells the investigator that they might have trouble getting any information out of her. Ben, you're a defense attorney. A lot of the time, that's the advice. Don't say anything until you have a lawyer. She really took it to heart. Didn't even say like, no, I don't have a bra. Just shook her head. Very stoic. What'd you make of it?
Yeah, I was struck by the contrast you noted between her and Hildebrand, that she was much more passive when you really would have thought the opposite. This is the mother of these 2 children, of the 6 children, and she acted, completely without any affect or emotion. You would have thought the opposite.
Would that have hurt her at trial? I mean, because on one hand, you could say, look, she didn't want to say anything. She's waiting for her attorney. But if that video like that played at her trial, would the jury look in and say, she seems really cold, really defiant, almost annoyed at officers. And we'll get into it a little bit, but do you think that would have hurt her?
I do, Jesse. I think that would have been very negative for her at trial, and that, as you suggested, that may have played into her ultimate decision to plead to the 4 counts.
So are they all living with you, or?
No, I haven't seen them for over a year.
Any of them?
No, none of them.
For a year?
Over a year.
Okay.
I've been in a separation.
From who?
From my wife and family. I don't know anything that's been going on.
Like, this is good, man. Like, I would love to be able to help you out with this, and like, I'm seeing the light at the end of this tunnel because I'm unaware of your involvement in what's really going on. So for you to say that you're unaware of the status of your kids kind of makes, I know that sounds kind of crummy to you, but it sounds kind of good to me. Have you communicated with your wife regarding like discipline with your kids or their care or their physical well-being?
No.
We kind of knew this already, right? From the statements of his attorney, Randy Kester, but it is very different hearing from Kevin Frankie himself.
It is very different. This is the first time we have heard from him. We've only spoken through his attorney. He's chosen not to comment when we've seen him outside of different court hearings. And you can even hear the detectives who are asking him questions are in disbelief. What do you mean you haven't seen your children for over a year? What do you mean you don't know what condition, what state your children are in? It's interesting. And he also is a bit guarded, as one would be when they're talking to police, but he doesn't want to name the person who called him and said to come pick up the kids. He keeps insisting that he's just there to pick up his children and he didn't expect to be sitting down and being interviewed by officers. We now know Ruby Frankie had called him and said, go pick up the children. But it's interesting to see the mindset he was in that day. And then later on, the interview was a 180, that second interview with officers.
Oh, we are going to get to that a little bit more, but he was almost defending Ruby and Jodi.
Do you know a female named Jodi?
She is a therapist and a life coach, and she's...
Do you respect her?
Do I respect her? Yeah, I think she's a very honest, truthful person, yes.
Okay.
Jodi saw the need for me to get help, and frankly, I agree. The space has been exactly what I need to face, my own addictions and receive the support and help that I've needed. What's going to happen with my wife? I love my wife.
I don't know. I'm being honest with you. I don't know. Haven't had anything to do with
I don't know if that charges against my wife.
Possibly. I think given the circumstances, that's highly appropriate, but again, I don't know your wife. I was hoping to gain some insight from you, but I don't necessarily know that that's something you wanted to...
I trust her.
A road you wanted to travel down with me, so...
And not without legal representation.
Yeah, alright, I get it.
But I love my wife, and I trust my wife.
And that seems to be a very different tune from his interview, what is being reported 2 weeks later with investigators.
Around that time, things with Ruby started, picking up, and I didn't understand why, but, Ruby wanted to meet in a parking lot and wanted me to sign over titles of documents, the 2 of our cars wanted me to sign them over to her name. And
to Ruby.
But I was like, okay, I'm just not, I'm in total compliance mode at this point. Just I'm a good husband, you see, you can trust me, and so whatever she asked, sign over the cars to me, no questions, just okay. And then another thing, she was like, I might want to do an investment, but I will need your signature. do you trust me enough that I could get your signature if I wanted to pursue my own investment? Yeah, sure. Whatever you say.
How big of an investment was she talking about? What did she tell you?
She never did, and I never signed anything. She never brought anything to me. But when I returned to the house, everything was packed up, and a neighbor came over and said she asked for the HOA rules and mentioned to him that she wanted to rent the house out. Which I was like, are you kidding me? And apparently she wanted to sell the house, but couldn't because my name was on the mortgage. And I think that's what she was talking about, of, will you sign something if I just put it in front of you? And you know what? I probably would have. Like, that's how messed up I was.
I'm glad you didn't.
Me too. That would have been disastrous.
So, Shelby, that's kind of a short summary of what he said later in that audio-only interview, where he also talked about the supernatural elements related to Jodi Hilderbrand, kind of like possession and all these things. And he's implicating her. He's even implicating, at one point, it seems to be that he's implicating other people as well. And there he was specifically talking about how Ruby was trying to get him to sign over documents, and how bizarre it was. Talk to me about what you made of that 180, because that was the thing that I took away more than anything. The 180 that was done both by Ruby and, well, not going to say Jodi. Jodi's been pretty consistent in what she said in her Jailhouse interviews, but the more Ruby and Kevin, like the 180 from defending their actions to, wait a minute, wake up call to what's going on.
It is a 180, truly. And the fact that it was only 2 weeks later that he had this change of heart on Jodi, on his wife, and how their relationship had evolved, it seems rather quick. We know that, speaking through his attorney, Randy Kester, he says that he too was victimized by Jodi. He was in this fog of connections, and he was made to believe that he had problems that he had to sort out and apologize for and sort of repent for. And then 2 weeks later, he explains in great detail to investigators how everything sort of fell apart within his family. And he called Jodi truthful and beautiful in that first interview. And he was so concerned about his wife. And then in that second interview, things were radically different. I think the timeline, a lot of people are going to question. Only 2 weeks later, and you have this realization. It's certainly unexplainable for the rest of us, those of us hearing this audio and listening to watching the interview. It's hard to wrap your mind around someone having such a mindset shift in such a short period of time.
Now, you could argue that people who are awakened from manipulation, they kind of realize what happened, and maybe it can happen over a few months, maybe it can happen over a few days. There could be a change. You know, you kind of see what the reality is. I mean, at the one point in that first interview, he's first finding out what happened to his kids and is trying to come to terms with that, then given some time. And you talk about the 180. Let me just throw this out here as well, because in one of the initial phone calls with his wife, I mean, it appears to be that it's between Kevin and Ruby. This is from September 1st, 2023, 2 days after her arrest. Listen to what Kevin said.
I am committed to our family. I'm committed to you and our marriage, no matter what happens.
Thank you. Thank you.
I will be here to support you in any way that I can.
Well, thank you for stepping up.
And we know, Shelby, that he is now filed for divorce. And so things have changed. Your thoughts?